We're glad you can join us again this week for our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast as we're going through the book of Genesis right now, looking at the events and at this point in the life largely of Joseph. We're coming to the place here, chapter 42, if you have your Bible, in which we are reuniting the family, Jacob's family, back with Joseph. Joseph had been separated from his family for over 20 years. And finally, things are being worked out to bring them back together. And this is where the chapter 42, pretty much to the end of the book of Genesis, is dealing with that type of thing and Joseph's involvement in his family once again. Right now, he is the number 2 man in Egypt. He's in charge of all the grain and so forth that people are needing during this great famine. And so we find in chapter 42 that Jacob decides that they can no longer live without grain and food. So he sends 10 of his sons, verse 3, down to Egypt to buy grain. Now, of course, they don't realize that Joseph is the key man there. And so when they show up, verse 7, Joseph saw his brothers. He recognized them. So he knew who they were. But it says here they did not recognize him. He had disguised himself in such a way that, of course, they weren't expecting him. Who would have thought someone they sold into slavery 20-some years ago is now the number 2 man in all the kingdom of Egypt? So they weren't expecting that, but he did recognize them. They did not recognize him. But Joseph does some interesting things at this point. First of all, he's suspicious of them. So we can give him a break at this point. Have these men changed? Are they the same evil, mean-spirited men that tried to kill him at first and then sold him into slavery and seem to have no remorse? Are these the same men or not? He wants to know that before he pushes on. So I think we can give him every benefit of the doubt at this point. He accuses them of being spies in verse 9. And then in verse 15 it says he's going to test them. And so he tells them to go back and bring their younger brother to him. Now, perhaps Joseph is not real sure they haven't killed Benjamin. I mean, he was probably the favorite son now of Jacob, and so maybe they've killed him. He doesn't know. So he wants them to prove that Benjamin is even alive. And so he put him in prison, verse 17, for 3 days as they waited on that. Then he let them go. As we move down to verses 19 and 20, he lets them out of prison, but he keeps one. He keeps Simeon in jail. And it's going to send the rest of them back to bring back Benjamin. Now, what's interesting here at this point is verses 21 and 22. These men now have a conversation right in front of Joseph in the Hebrew language that they do not think that Joseph understands. Of course, Joseph does. But here's what they're talking about. Verse 21 says, "Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul, and he pleaded with us. Yet we would not listen. Therefore his distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not tell you? Do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen? Now comes the reckoning for his blood." And they did not know that Joseph understood. And it does say Joseph turned aside in verse 24, and he wept. Well, what we have here then is the effects of guilt. For 20 years or more, these boys have had a guilt over this unconfessed sin that has not been forgiven. They've kept going with his lie against to Jacob. Jacob never knew the truth, and he never knew what was going on, and guilt began to eat at their souls. That's what sin does when we don't deal with it properly, when we don't seek forgiveness, when we don't give confession and turn to the Lord. Sin simply has a way of eating at our souls. And we find that these men now are recognizing that God is apparently turning on them at this point. Matter of fact, in verse 28, he says, "What is this that God has done to us?" So they're recognizing that the punishment they're receiving is coming directly from the hand of God, that they're getting what they deserve because of their sin. And so this is the picture that we have here at this point. Simeon now is going to be held in hostage, and the other boys go home to bring Benjamin back, and Joseph said, "You can't come back here without him." So they go back home, and they're going to spend a great deal of time, almost up to 2 years perhaps, before they come back, at least a year. But they finally will have to break down and do so. We'll see that in chapter 43. So if you haven't read ahead so far, go ahead and do so. Read chapter 43 for tomorrow, and we will pick up that story together tomorrow. Matter of fact, chapter 43 and 44. See you then.